Hi everyone. Really happy to introduce Glenn. Do you want to start us off with an intro to you and your books, Glenn?
Yes, I can. I'm Glen R. Stansfield. I like to tell people that I like to kill people in stories, mainly. The mainly bit gets people a little bit worried, but I'm really a nice person. I haven't got the first book with me because I don't want anybody to read the first book. It's being the first, you will look back on it and you think, did I really write that? Did I really put that out in the world? But the second one, which is getting in front of the camera, is Harry. The character of Harry came about from a short course I was doing, and I created the character for a 15, I don't know, I think it was a 1,500 word story, maybe a bit longer than that. And I knew I couldn't let that character go, so I wrote a complete story around him. And that led to this one, which is Out of Darkness, which is the latest one that was released in February this year. Harry appears in that. Don't want to give too much away, but he's now part of a team. And that's currently longlisted on the Page Turner Awards at the moment. So I'm waiting to hear if it gets shortlisted, which should be in the next couple of weeks. So I was quite pleased to get that far.
I was going to say that's exciting, being listed for an award.
Yeah, it's. I'd actually forgotten I'd entered it, to be honest. And then I saw that I was a finalist, and then they said it's now longlisted. So let's see if it gets shortlisted.
Yeah, I mean, that can be an exciting thing, can't it? Getting onto a prize list, because it brings you to more people.
Well, it's supposed to bring you more people, but that's one of the hardest parts of this, as being an indie, is getting people to see your work, because there are so many people out there that are producing books, some good, some bad, and getting your book above the noise is really the hardest part of it. Well, the second hardest part. The hardest part is actually writing it in the first place, but getting people to see it, that's the difficult one. Getting people to review it is also difficult, because people will tell you they like it, but then they won't tell anybody else they like it. And that's something quite important.
Have you got any top tips for like getting your book noticed then for anyone else who's watching who might be an indie?
No, because if they've got top tips, I would like to hear them. I think the best way is actually face-to-face. I find I sell more books face-to-face than I do online. So if I go to an event where I'm a signing author, for instance, I will sell more books that way. And because you can engage in a conversation, I think that's what it is. And even if you don't sell anything to anybody, these conversations are very good. You're talking to readers, and that's quite important. You can find out what they like and what they don't like. I did sell books in the Middle East in the shops in Bahrain, and if I did an event there, it was amazing how many of the Bahraini women would ask what it was about. You would say it's about a killer. They wanted it. And it seems to be women like books with people getting killed in them, and that seems to be a worldwide phenomenon. So crime is a big seller. It's second to romance, isn't it? And I can't write romance, so I have to kill people in my books.
That's it. I don't know. I think it can work with romance, and I've got there's a series of books I really like that are written by a crime author that got a bit of romance going on as well.
I do have it starts in Harry and it continues in Out of Darkness. There is a romantic element in there, but it is just a minor part of it. You've got to reflect life. I think you have to reflect life in the books, unless you're writing fantasy. And then in some way, you're still reflecting life. We can only imagine what something is like from another person's point of view, or another animal's point of view, for instance. We can only imagine it. We don't actually know it. We don't experience it. So we can only write from the point of view of what we think it would be like. So the romance side for me is how I would feel it would be. Whether that works or not, I don't know. I don't know whether I'm a romantic person. You'd have to ask my wife that.
Does your kind of globe trotting, because we've covered in like the short time that we've been speaking, like that you've lived in a few different places. Does that help with what you're writing?
It's a strange thing because both Harry and Out of Darkness are set in London mainly. and it's Harry is in the East End of London, and a lot of Out of Darkness takes place in the East End of London, which is not a place I know very well at all. But in Out of Darkness, there is a part where they go to Dubai, and that is from personal experience. And the hotel that's mentioned in there, the airport and everything, is from personal experience. So yes, it does help. But then they move on to Hong Kong, and I've never been to Hong Kong. But the internet is a wonderful thing because you can go to Hong Kong now via Google. You can look at streets with Google Street. You can go down alleyways that you couldn't go down unless you went there in person. So you can visit these places, but the personal element, because when you're there in person, you don't just get the sights, you get the sounds, you get the smells, you get the feeling of the place. You get an element that you don't get, or several elements that you don't get from just looking at it online. So yeah, I do think it does make a difference.
What kind of challenges did you face when you were writing these ones then? Did you have any kind of research sort of?
Oh, I research, I would say 50% of my work is research. I think you have to do. When I was teaching this at the Bahrain Writers Circle, the way I explain it is if your truths are accurate, you can hide your lies better, and the lies are your story. So if you are accurate with the truths that are in the book, the actual elements that are real, because I write in the real world, I don't have a make-believe world, and a lot of the events in the books are true and woven into the fictitious part of it. So if you can make your truths accurate, and the way I put it is, supposing you put in your book that she was wearing a pair of Jimmy Choo shoes that were salmon pink and silver, and somebody knows that Jimmy Choo never made shoes that way, they have been jolted out of the story and back into reality. And what you need to do is keep them in that story. So you don't want to be doing that, because you may have lost the reader forever. So the research is very important. So if the elements that are true in the book are accurate, then you can keep your reader and you can keep them in the story. So there is a lot of research into it. Harry was a lot easier, I think. Out of Darkness, because of its subject matter, which is human trafficking, that was very difficult. That was a very difficult subject to research. And in fact, the book sat for 2 years after I'd finished it, and I didn't want to see it, because when you find out that you can buy a girl from Morocco for $12, that is quite harrowing. And the fact that so many people are trafficked in the world every year, in every country, we tend to think of it as a problem for other places. People are trafficked in the UK. People are stolen in the UK to be trafficked. And so that was the biggest thing that I faced in writing that one. And I didn't set out to tell a story about trafficking. It just became part of the story. So it actually was quite overwhelming in the end.
Is it hard to write a subject like that into your novel and sort of manage it in a way that is sensitive to the topic, if you know what I mean? So you're not.
Yes, I do know what you mean. I think it helps that my protagonists are strong females. So I'm not having the men coming to rescue the women. If anything, it's the other way around. So I think in this case, it was easier because I've got strong women in there, because it was Asian women that were trafficked in this case and murdered. And it was difficult, but I do think I treat it sensitively. And I do cover the subject in the end of the book. There's a separate chapter about human trafficking and the problem of human trafficking, which has nothing to do with the story. There's contact numbers in there. If anyone suspects anyone of being trafficked, they can contact people. But yeah, it's going back to your question, it is difficult to do it sensitively, but I hope I've achieved that. And I don't want to sensationalize it, and I try not to sensationalize it.
I mean, at the same time, it's good to educate people about problems, isn't it, in the world that they're.
It is.
It's one of those hard lines to tread, isn't it? Because we need to talk about it, but we don't want to.
Yeah, I mean, I don't set out to do. I don't set out to tell people or educate people, but I think it's part of. I set out to entertain, but if education comes as part of that, then I think that is definitely a bonus. The same in Harry, because it covers homelessness, but it didn't set out to cover homelessness. It's just an aspect of the book. We're dealing with homeless people in it, and some of the problems that the homeless people face, particularly as it was set. Originally, it was set around the time of the Olympics, so there were a lot of homeless people being moved on for the Olympic Park being built in the East End of London. So the story is not about that. It's just a byproduct of the story. It's in that area, so it becomes a byproduct. And I don't set out to have these themes in the book. It's just they develop as you write.
Fair enough. When you set out with Harry, then, because he's a great character, what did he come first, or did your idea for the plot come first?
No, Harry came first. Harry was the original idea of Harry, and the things that happen in the book were in the short story. I said 1,500 words. It was more than that. I think it was more like 5,000 words. The character came, and the short story around that particular bit of him being a homeless person, but with his background not being an easy pick. That came with the short story, and then that developed into the novel. So the short story with the ending. The thing is, I tend to write my endings first, so I know where I'm going with the story. I don't always know where I'm coming from. So I knew that Harry was going to do this in the end of this short story, but I don't want to give too much away because it's the main part of the book, Harry. I don't want people to know exactly what's going on, but let's say Harry is not all he seems to be. And that started out as the character, and the character has developed, and it's developed in Out of Darkness as well. He's definitely multi-layered, and he's really an enigma because of what he does and yet his beliefs. So, and that has been tackled. I've just recently done a screenplay for Harry. I've done an adaptation into a screenplay, and I've got feedback from a script doctor, I suppose, how the fact that Harry has these multifacets, but we can build on them even more.
Interesting. So have you had any screenplay interest, or are you just writing it speculatively?
It was an entry into a competition. I did a course about 3-4 years ago with Robert McKee, I think he was basically a script doctor for Hollywood, and he's in his 80s now, but he does these courses where he talks about screenwriting and the elements that you need to put into screenwriting. And screenwriting has been something that has interested me because you have to develop your story with location and dialogue, and you don't have anything else to tell the story with. So you've got to interest a director who will then interpret that and make it into the story that people watch. But you've still got to try and tempt them in with just the dialogue and the location. And the feedback I got, considering it was not only my first adaptation, but my first screenplay, was really good. I'm not on the recommended list, but I'm on the consider for both the screenplay and the writer, which I think is a pretty good achievement on the first attempt. And I was expecting just give up and go to knitting or something. And to get positive feedback the way I did was really a lift. And we need that lift. As writers, we need the lift. We need those reviews coming in that say, not just from professionals, but from readers that say, I've really enjoyed this, or you've surprised me and I've thoroughly enjoyed what happened in the story. So,
if it was adapted, who would you like to play in it?
that's always a difficult one, but I've always had somebody in mind.
Who the actors would be? Who would you be?
Who would I be? Oh,
Yeah.
I'd be, if I was going to go in it, I'd be a minor part. I'm not an actor, so I'd have to have something that was either 2 lines longer or not speaking at all. I can't act. I've tried in the past. I can't do that. Yeah. Funny you say that because I was thinking about who I would like to play various parts. And when I'm writing, I tend to have somebody in mind for the part and write around them. This is in the book even. So I have a person in mind when I'm writing the character. Now, it's not them, obviously, because you don't know the actors, but it's how I would see them playing that part, if that makes sense.
Because I've heard interviews with authors where they said that it's you might imagine someone who's playing it, but then you probably don't want to come out and say who it is, because if it is adapted and that person isn't playing it, it's like you're kind of
Yeah, yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, I do have somebody in mind. I'm not going to, like you say, I'm not going to say who it is, but I can give a strong hint. He's dying for a script where he doesn't die.
uh,
And I would see him playing Harry. I think he's the perfect person for that.
okay, interesting. Would you want Harry to be done first, or would
Yeah,
you?
I think it's. Yeah, I think Harry should be done first because it is the prequel. Although it's, I mean, generally prequels are brought out after the originals, but in this case, it's the prequel because NVIDIA, the group in Out of Darkness, only comes into existence at the end of Harry. So we can't really say it's an NVIDIA story because it's not. It's about Harry and what happens to him. The fact that he gets involved in NVIDIA is coming later. So I think it should come, although the books don't need to be read in sequence to make sense of it. And I do want to do that. I don't intend to write story after story with NVIDIA. I've always said it'll be 4 or 5 books long and no more. And then I have to move on to something else because I think they go stale. The characters go stale, the stories go stale. I think you have to move away, unless you're somebody like Ian Rankin who can write rebus and every rebus is different. I think it becomes difficult to just keep writing one after another. So I would move away from NVIDIA. But if we were shooting them, yes, I would like to see them done in order, even though they are standalones.
So if you moved away from NVIDIA, what do you feel like you would write?
Well, I have several on the go. I've got a fantasy novel, which is a crime novel, involves a dragon detective and a humanoid. We have to say humanoid because it's obviously not set on this planet. I've got a historical novel on the go around my family's surname, because that is allegedly from a Viking who fought with William the Conqueror in 1066. So it's starting out 200 or 300 years before that, when they moved into France and became the Norsemen. I've also got another one about a heist, but that's set in modern day London and in ancient Egypt. So there's lots of things that I want to have a go at, and I know that the people nowadays like a series, or they like an author to be a crime writer or a sci-fi writer or whatever. But I want to write different genres. I want to cross the genres.
Do you like to read fantasy? Is that why you're dipping into writing it, or?
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes I like to read fantasy. I like to read sci-fi. I like to read crime. I just like to read, and I've even read I've read chick lit in the past. What's classed as chick lit, shall we say? And if the story's well written, it doesn't matter. I don't think it matters. I don't think you need to stick to one style.
You don't, and I like to read things where the genres merge.
Yeah,
Quite
yeah.
often, I think that makes life pretty interesting.
Well, the fantasy novel is about a murder, and it's a dragon that was murdered. So, yeah, that crosses crime and the fantasy, and the fact that dragons and the humans or the humanoids don't get on, but they now have to work together to solve this murder. And there's a lot of things in that. I don't even know whether that'll be a YA book or whether that's going to be an adult book. But again, I mean, I read a lot of Terry Pratchett, and I'm quite happy reading his YA as well as his Discworld stuff, because I think, or even the YA in Discworld with the Tiffany Aching stories, I think if it's a good story, it doesn't matter who it's aimed at.
You do have to think about kind of content, though, don't you, when you're writing for different audiences? And
Yes,
like,
you
how
do.
you're gonna.
I mean, I'm quite realistic in my dialogue with swear words. I don't do it for effect, but where there would be likely a swear word, there will be a swear word. And I know some people don't like that, and they don't want you to put them in. But in real life, when do you walk down the street and you don't hear a swear word? It's there all the time. It's around us. And what is it in the end? It's a sound. Why do we find it offensive? Why do we see those letters on the page as being offensive? I don't make them offensive. I don't use it about people, but I use it in a way that would be realistic. Police officers don't say, "Oh, by gosh, look what just happened." They don't say that. And so I don't put that in the dialogue.
Fair enough, I guess. So why? Because I'm still intrigued about your fantasy thing.
That'll have to be the next one then, will
it? It will, yeah. Why did you choose to go like really fantasy? Because I think when you're merging genres and you're trying to appeal to readers of both, like having dragons and humanoids is possibly a bit like pushing it for readers of crime, maybe.
Maybe
like,
I wasn't aiming for the crime market.
No, but I guess you might get more sales if there's a, way. I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with that thought.
I know what you're saying, because people who are, shall we say, hardened crime readers rather than hardened criminals probably wouldn't take to having a detective that is a dragon. I agree with that. But people who like fantasy would like a story that is around something that's not real. Or we say it's not real. How do we know it's not real? Might not. How do we know there's never been dragons? We don't know for sure. But it's something that you've got to let yourself go sometimes. And I think having a dragon is, I mean, how can you go wrong with a dragon in a story anyway? You're going to sell it to somebody because so many people like dragons. And if there's crime in it as well, and it's actually a little bit tongue-in-cheek, which makes me think it might be YA as well, in that you get the feeling of 1930s America with the mobsters and the prohibition going on in the background, because part of the story is around that sort of event where there's this liquid that's prohibited, but these guys are making it. It's like moonshine. And this is part of the story that's going on in the background. There's also a dragon that's trying to bring down the hierarchy, because the dragons are very structured in the hierarchy, and it's done by color in this particular story. So ice blue dragons are the royalty. I think it's red dragons are are in the police. So there's a structure there as well. So there's a lot involved in that, creating that, and it also backs you into corners terribly. Because I had a dragon that was reading reports, and I thought, how's a dragon going to type a report? So then I had to create creatures that work for the dragons that type the reports, and they dictate it. Because dragons in the story are not small.
No.
So it does create problems.
But interesting problems that you need to solve.
Yeah. Not the usual plot holes. These are physical holes that we've got to go down. The offices, for instance, have got to be much bigger because they accommodate dragons, and they've got open fronts because dragons can't use doors. So that sort of thing, I have to create a new world. And every time you come across a problem, you have to think of a way to get around that makes it semi-realistic. I mean, obviously with dragons in it, it's not realistic, but you've not got to have these holes that people say, well, how did they do that? How did the dragon type? They don't even have fingers.
Do you well, they could use dictation software. While you're
They haven't invented it in this case, but they have people who take the dictation. So they have workers who work for them that have fingers.
While you're writing these things like fantasy or historical crime, or even going back to the NVIDIA ones that we were talking about, that are a bit more thriller based, Do you go and sort of immerse yourself in what's currently available in those forms of literature? See what
No,
other
I tend
people
to stay
are
away
doing, or
from no, I tend to stay away from reading those sort of things if I'm writing it. That way I can't. And Bernard Cornwell said this about writing historical novels. He won't read an historical manuscript. If somebody sends him a manuscript to have a look at, he won't read it, because then he can't be accused of bringing that into his story, which you could do accidentally. If you've read somebody else's, you could accidentally include that in your story, thinking that it's your original thought and you've actually taken it from somebody else. So no, I tend not to read the crime novels when I'm doing that. And usually I'm just too busy doing research once I'm starting to write again. So I drop the reading quite considerably, and it's just looking at computer screens, or maybe going to the library. Now I've got access to libraries again. And at the moment, there's 2 books downstairs which are on ancient Egypt for the heist one, because I want to know how pharaohs. So this is a part of the reality thing. How did pharaohs really live? We only see it in the movies, in these gilded palaces and marble things, but they actually lived in mud buildings, the same as the rest of the population. But they were a lot more opulent than the standard house, and a lot bigger, a lot more rooms. But they weren't these marvelous palaces of tall marble pillars, etc. So I tend to stay away from anything that's to do with what I'm writing at the time, unless it's for the research. I won't read a novel in that genre.
did you use any kind of police experts or anything when you were doing the video ones?
Not the video ones. I was in touch with officers in Grampian region when I was doing Fishing for Stones, the first book. And I was also a part-time police officer for 3 years in the Channel Islands. So I've some knowledge of procedures as well. But I've not used any for this, for the NVIDIA series. But obviously with what I'd already done in Fishing for Stones, I know how a crime room works, how can't even say, I'm a writer and I can't think of words sometimes, how the office works in the police station. So I know how the teamwork goes. Not that I was ever involved in any major stuff, but I've got a good idea of what goes on. And as I say, I was in touch with Grampian officers. The same with in Fishing for Stones. There's some air traffic stuff. And my background's aviation, but details such as, was the air traffic open at night in Aberdeen, because that's set in the Aberdeen area, and would Aberdeen radar be operating? Would they be seeing this helicopter that's stolen in Fishing for Stones? So that's the sort of detail that I needed to go into to make the story work. And so I will approach the right people when I need to do. And in Fishing for Stones, there's also, is it in Fishing or it's in Harry? I think it's in Harry, where it's in Harry, where they go to the court in London. And I wanted to know whether people who were witnesses would come in through the main entrance. So I wrote to the Old Bailey and asked, would witnesses come in the main entrance, or is there a special entrance for witnesses? I got a very nice letter back from somebody with a very long name and a lot of titles behind his name, explaining, yes, they would come in through the main entrance. And that just gave me one line in the book. So yes, I'm quite happy to go and approach people. The only people who've never got back to me are diamond merchants when I was asking about diamonds, and the Press and Journal in Aberdeen when I was asking about their newsroom, and they didn't even respond. But other than that, oh, that's a lie. And the Coast Guard, UK Coast Guard, when I asked about tracking ships. So I approached that a different way, and I got in touch with a company that does the ship tracking in Germany, and they're credited in the front of the book.
Cool. And then like forensics wise, because you have quite a bit of forensics in the one I read, is that Into Darkness.
Yeah,
No,
a lot of that comes from watching
the science, right? Isn't it?
Yeah, a lot of it comes from watching real life TV, and the forensics in that. Also, there's plenty of books on forensics as well. So I do the research in the books as well, and I think it's the other thing is reading, this is going to sound macabre, but I'll read an autopsy report or a post-mortem in the UK. And in fact, I've done that for the dragon story and then adapted it to a post-mortem on a dragon. And that was a gunshot wound. So all this is there to do the research. It's all available online and you can do it. And it does seem a bit odd reading that sort of thing, but if it gives me the realism in the story, then I need to do it. My wife says I go too far, but I think you've got to get the details right.
Karen's asked how important place is in your writing.
How important the place is.
Yeah, like a sense of places in writing.
Yeah, I think it's very important. Again, you need to have sights, sounds, smells, and feel of a place. So yes, it is important. And although I haven't visited some of the places in the East End, I have visited others in the East End. For instance, the church that's on the cover in Harry, I took that photograph. So I've visited that church and that churchyard and the area around it, and where the first body is found in the canal in Limehouse Cut. I've visited there as well. But there are other places I've not visited in person. But once you've been into the area, I think you get a good feel for it anyway. So place is important. Yes, I think you've got to transport people to where the story is. And if you can't do that accurately, I think you're going to lose them.
She also said you write non-fiction as well. Which do you prefer to do, fiction or non-fiction?
The only non-fiction I've really done is the cookbook, which came about because no, I haven't said that. I've done some short non-fiction as well for magazines, but I definitely prefer to make up a story because non-fiction, everything's got to be accurate. Whereas the fiction, only the truths have got to be accurate. The lies can be woven around them. So you can twist things a little bit there. And if people can't prove it wrong, it's a bit like doing psychology. If you've got a good argument, you win because nobody can prove you wrong. So yeah, I definitely preferred the cookbook was that was hard work. That was very hard work. That was 82 weeks we did, although it's around the world in 80 dishes. It was 82 weeks of buying the ingredients, photographing them, cooking them, photographing the finished result, and then doing the research and the write-up for the dish and the country where it came from, or any interesting facts to go with the dish. And that was done every week for 82 weeks. And that was very hard work. So we nearly got divorced when I said, well, around the world in 80 fishes. That was, that is not happening.
Fair enough. Donna said she's sorry she was late. Apparently she was using her tech skills. Were requested somewhere. Donna does interviews as well, so a good person to get in touch with.
Yeah, I'm open to anything that puts me out there and gets me in front of people. I'm not going to say it gets me more sales, but I mean, obviously sales are important, but I'd like to be more known. I think that's the thing. Get more known, and then sales will follow from that. It's not just all about selling, it's about the interaction between the reader and the writer. And I've done these in Bahrain as well, in front of groups where it's get to know the writer. And I think it's a good thing.
I'm intrigued about your aviation background. Are you aviation like flying or kind of more behind the scenes?
I was an engineer for 50 years on the avionics side, which is the aviation electronics. So things like radio, radar, instruments, electrics, and autopilot, those were the things that I looked after. And a mixture of, I started with airlines, I moved into North Sea oil, moved back to airlines, and I finished up the last 10 years in Bahrain was on Royal Flight helicopters, flying the King around. So you had to get that one right because you weren't coming out of the country if you finished up killing the King. You were definitely not going to be leaving. So, but I always thought of it, I mean, people say it's very responsible. And it's, in some ways, it's more responsible than a pilot because a pilot's responsibility starts at the beginning of his flight and ends at the end of it. Whereas our responsibility starts when we sign that job off and ends when that job's signed by somebody else the next time which may be 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, depends on the job, could be never. And that job might never be done again. You might have done an installation and that is never certified again. So our responsibility continues, and not just on one aeroplane, on every aeroplane that you've worked on, until somebody else signs that. But you don't think about it that way. You're trained to do the job. You do the job as you've been trained to do. You do it by the manual. And if things go wrong, then you are covered because you've done it by the way they said to do it. It's become more that way now, where some engineers that are coming up now, a lot of them don't know why they're doing what they're doing. They're just doing it because the book says you have to do it that way, but they don't understand the reasoning behind it. Whereas when I was trained, we were trained in depth. Our license was the equivalent of a degree. It was to that level. Nowadays, it's not quite there. But it's served me well for 50 years. It's kept me employed. Occasional hiccups, but there's always another job there. And whilst we may eventually get rid of pilots, we're still going to have maintenance. Although I'll never get in an aeroplane that doesn't have somebody sat at the front driving it, that's for sure.
Yeah. Do you... I've got so many more questions. I'm going to ask you my favourite one at the moment, which is what have you read recently and really enjoyed? And it can be any genre. We don't discriminate.
Yeah, well, I'm actually reading a non-fiction book about Vikings, believe it or not, because I've got an interest in that. I've just finished running people around for the Wigton Book Festival. I was a volunteer driver. So I've been ferrying authors around from the festival to the station and from the station to the festival. And one of the authors was Dr. Eleanor Barraclough, who's a historian. She's a professor. I believe she's at Bath University at the moment. And she has done a book on Vikings, not the Vikings that we see, the raiders and all of that, but the people, the ordinary people in the villages. And that's what I'm reading at the moment. I'm thoroughly enjoying it, finding out about their everyday life, not their raiding life. And before that, it was actually a fantasy book, and I'm still reading that as well. I've got two on the go. I've always got two books on the go. And Shadow of the Kings, I think it's called. I can't remember the author, but this is book 2 of 4. And book 1, I thoroughly enjoyed that because it was so different from anything else I've read before. And again, another world builder.
I like Norse history. It's worth delving into the sagas if you haven't already.
Yeah, I haven't looked into the sagas, but I think I will be doing. I've got to finish this book first. And I've also got to read these Egyptian, ancient Egypt books. But I'm finding now that history is something that's becoming more important to me. And when I left school, or even when I was at senior school, I didn't understand why people studied history, because like George W. Bush, well, that's all in the past, isn't it? Why would we bother about it? But it's actually very important to know where you've come from. I think so. I don't mean your personal family line, but the whole history of your nation, your people, and why things are the way they are. I think it is quite important. I think the first time I felt that way was near Gothland. I don't know if you know Gothland. It was where Heartbeat was set. And there's a road there that was originally thought to be Roman, but now they're not so sure it's Roman, but it's certainly that time, but they think there was other people built it. And to stand on the cobblestones and think this was 2,000 years ago that this road was built and it's still here. We can't get roads to last 2 weeks now in the UK. Never mind 2,000 years. So that's the first time I really got that sense of history. And that's why I'm certainly doing the historical thing around my name, which again is not going to be true. Whether it's going to be crime in it or not, I don't know. But there will be true things in it, like Rollo leaving and going to France. It wasn't France then. The siege of Paris will be in it as well, and things like that from the Viking point of view. But there will be a lot of, I suppose it's going to be a bit like Bernard Cornwell's Uhtred, if you've ever seen any of read his books about Uhtred, he's actually, I think he's a Saxon, and then he becomes he gets captured by the Vikings, and then he's a Viking, then he's a Setter, and he doesn't know what he is, to be honest. But I think he ultimately settles on the Viking side. So it's a long time since I read those books. Yeah, I think that sense of history is quite important. I forgot where we started that question from.
I don't remember either. I've been to the Roman Road at Sunday, so I know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
I live in Yorkshire, so it's not exactly a trip.
Sorry, you live where?
I live in Yorkshire, so it's not.
Okay, right. You're not too far away then. I can't say too much because I'm from Lancashire. So
Exactly. We could fall out. I'm not from Yorkshire, so you're all right. I just live
it's funny
here.
because every time a Lancastrian and a Yorkshireman, Yorkshire woman meet, the first thing they say is, "Oh, I'm terribly sorry." You know, I'm from Yorkshire. Oh dear. Well, somebody has to be. But actually, it's banter. I mean, that's the thing in the north. Everybody understands banter, which is perhaps not understood as much in the south. I don't think people can take offence much quicker in the south. And I try to explain to somebody, if they're insulting you, they like you. In the north, if you're getting an insult, you're probably liked. Not always, but mostly. So it is a banter thing. And we're very similar. And my name is a Yorkshire name. This village of Stansfield is in Yorkshire.
My unmarried name is a Scottish one, but I'm like I said, I've just adopted here. I'm not from Yorkshire at all. Wasn't born here. Just chosen a chosen hometown.
Yeah, well, I think I live in a village rather than a town, but I think this chose me rather than anything else. It's where my wife was living when I met her. So I finished up moving here. And then we moved away, and then now we're back.
Which is not a bad thing. You sort of talked about doing some book events in Bahrain and things. Have you got any book events booked over here, like real life or other events like this?
Not at the moment. I did a 10-minute reading at the Wigton Book Festival, which is to get in on that as a local author is quite good. But next year, I then want to start hitting some of the events. I'm trying to get to Crime Fest Bristol. I booked the hotel, but I would be going just as a member of the public, unless I get invited on a panel, which is highly unlikely. Being in India, it's difficult. There is an indie panel, but there's a lot of indies out there that sell a lot more books than I do. And they're the ones who are going to get invited. So it is difficult. It is difficult to get out there. But if there's any author signing events that I can get to, then I will be doing them. Yeah. I don't know how. I've done one and it didn't go too well. We did sell some books. The events in Bahrain were very good. Although it depends, you had to pick your event because some perfume sold a lot better than books. Depends on what's going on. The Christmas fairs usually did very well for us, and the bookstore events always did well. They always did well.
Donna Donna said she's offended. She's from Luton and she can do banter.
Well, she's from the continent. I mean, she's from Luton. As Lancastrians consider anything south of Manchester Ship Canal to be abroad, really. And it's not everybody that's like that, I have to say, but there are a lot of people that they don't understand banter at all, and they do get offended.
And Sam has asked about your contribution to Alex Shaw's Arabian Noir anthology.
Yes. Well, I'd known Alex before that. And in fact, we invited him to come and talk to us on Zoom at one of our business of writing meetings in Bahrain. And then Alex got in touch with me and said, would you be interested in writing a short story to go in the anthology? And he said, it will be edited, it will be checked, and if it's not good enough, it's not going in. And actually, two of us from the Writers' Circle entered stories, and we're both in there. Rohini Sundaran is the other one. And yes, I actually had that story already written. I don't know why I wrote it, to be honest. I just wrote this short story around the wrong feet and sent it to Alex, and they said yes, and it went in the anthology. So it was very good to get that. I mean, it's the first time a chapter of the Crime Writers Association has actually done an anthology. So to be in the first one is something else. I was really pleased with that. And Rohini, who doesn't, Rohini is an Indian, well, she's Canadian, but she's Indian ancestry, as in the Far East India, not the Native American type. And she generally writes, I would say, literary fiction. But I finally persuaded her to start killing people, and she seems to be quite good at it, I have to say. She did say she had to kill a character. She said, I have to kill a character and I really don't want to do it. And I said, kill him. Once you've killed the first, all the rest just come easy. So once you've killed your first character, it's not difficult. And she's done it. She's taken to crime. She's had another story published as well, a crime fiction story.
I'm going to ask you some more of Sam's questions. You'll like Sam's questions because she's a fellow Mancunian.
Okay. I can't say I'm a Mancunian because I'm another, I don't know, 800 feet higher than her from the Pennines in the Rosendale Valley, but pretty close, 20 miles.
She has said you spoke of your childhood being a magical time. Does that innocence have a place in your novels?
No, I wouldn't say the innocence. Well, actually, yes. Because I am writing, and it's been on the back burner for a while, a World War II story about a young lad who grows up in Lancashire pre-war, but he gets called in, he finishes up in World War II, he volunteers, he wants to be a pilot, and he finishes up as a rigger, but he eventually does become a pilot. But it's not about his exploits as a pilot, it's about his innocence growing up to start with, and how he's affected by an aeroplane that he sees because the pilot waves to him. And then it's his journey emotionally. And on the other side is the German pilot who shoots him down, his journey, and how they're actually, neither of them want to be there doing what they're doing. One of them is there because he's defending his country, and the other one's there because he has no choice. Otherwise, he'll be killed. So he's got to fight or die, basically, because that was the regime. So it's about their journeys. So the innocence is in there to that degree, but I don't think it comes in any of the other novels, really. But there was an innocence then, and I don't think kids get that now. They don't get the childhood they should do. There's a push now to educate from a very early age. And we should let teachers teach, because teachers know how to teach, and they know that play is very important in the early stages, because that's how children learn. And if we keep force feeding them things, they'd switch off. They don't want to know. That's why a lot of kids won't read nowadays, because they're forced to read. They're not encouraged. They're told, you must read. You've got to read this. And then we give them electronic devices to keep them quiet as well. So yeah, I think there was an innocence there that's not there now. There was play that's not there now. You don't often see kids doing play acting nowadays. You don't see them pretending to be fighter pilots or pirates or whatever. You don't see that anymore. Most of them are on some sort of device and not interacting with the real world.
It depends what kids you're hanging around with.
It does.
We have some very vivid imaginations where I work.
Yes. Now, I have to say, I was at the Canadian school in Bahrain, and I was invited to go and talk to 3 different classes about it. And I got them to write a short story, each class to write a short story. And the stuff that they wrote some of it was absolutely incredible. There are some definite writers there for the future. So there is, but there's a lot of sitting there just thumbs going, because we've got a generation of kids now that use their thumbs for almost everything, because that's what they use to type. So even if they ask them to point, they will point with a thumb.
You've been asked your memorable moments as an author so far.
Oh, that's a good one. I think getting in the anthology was a good one. That definitely did, because I was fully expecting not to be accepted, because this is for people that originally was for members of the Crime Writers Association, and I'm not eligible to be a member of the Crime Writers Association because I don't sell enough books, and well, for various reasons, you've got to have somebody to put you forward, etc., as an indie. So I think to be accepted in an anthology that is accredited by the Crime Writers Association, supported by them, that was a highlight. But I think the biggest highlight is your first positive review. For somebody to say, and this must be for every author, for somebody to say, you've come into my life and you've entertained me and I've thoroughly enjoyed it, that's a privilege. For somebody to accept what you've written as part of their life and then tell you about it, and that you've entertained them or whatever it is that you've done for them, that, I think, and that's when I tell the classes, so it's the hardest thing you can do is writing. Well, I think so. You're drained. You wake up in the middle of the night with trying to solve a plot hole, and in the morning you can't remember it, and because you've forgotten to have the notebook at the side of your bed and write it down. So it takes over your life, and then you get that one positive review, person saying, I've really enjoyed what you've done, and that just lifts you completely. That really does lift you. So I think that's probably the highlight, is getting your first positive review from somebody that you don't know. I mean, you get positive reviews from people that you do know, and sometimes you get negative reviews from people you do know. But to have a complete stranger say, you've done something for me, and they've invited you into their lives, so it is a privilege because they've bought your book.
Donna says you don't need the stuff you just said to be a member of the CWA. It may have been in the past, but it's not now. And I'm going to ask you one of my other favourite author chat questions, which is, would you make a graphic novel version of one of your books? I feel like you
I wouldn't know how to start. I honestly wouldn't know how to start, because we had a graphic novelist I picked up one from the station, and her graphic novel is a silent graphic novel, which I didn't even know what that was to start with. And it's about her journey because her brother had cancer. So it's her and his journey, this graphic novel. But I wouldn't know where to start. Honestly, I have no idea how I would do it. I think you have to stick to what you're capable of doing.
Yeah. Silent graphic novels, the ones like Jason writes, where there's no dialogue.
There's no dialogue, yeah. That's what I gathered. Yeah, but I'll be honest, I've never really looked at graphic novels. Maybe I should start looking at them.
You should. They're great, and there's some really good. A lot of the really cracking crime writers, like Ian Rankin and Denise Mina and stuff, have written for some big graphic novel things, especially Hellblazer. Get into that.
Yeah,
that has a lot of things by actual really famous crime authors.
Yeah, maybe I should. Maybe I should
look
at it.
Paul McDermott graphic novel that's really good. About antibiotic resistance.
Yeah, maybe I should do that. I'm having enough trouble writing what I'm writing. I've got so many things going, and I really do want to move into the screenwriting more. I'm definitely thinking of doing Out of Darkness next. I actually find the process easier because I've got the novel. So I know what would work and what wouldn't work on the screen. Or I think I'll know what would work and what wouldn't work on the screen. And I've already got quite a lot of the dialogue there. So that makes that a bit easier. So the way I did it for Harry is I just opened up, I used Scrivener as a writing program. I opened up Scrivener with the novel in there and then just copied each chapter and then changed it into a screen format and worked from there.
So we're coming up towards the end of our chat, and for the people watching, do you want to remind them what they're going to go away and buy?
What they're going to go away and buy? What I hope you're going away and buy. Otherwise, we will send Harry. Get in the right place. Harry, you don't want coming visiting you because he doesn't do nice house calls. Harry was the first one. That's why it says Invidia Syndicate prequel. And I'm not going to tell you too much about it, but they did train him to kill and now they can't stop him. That's the tagline on it. I didn't use a tagline on Out of Darkness at all. Out of Darkness is the first in the Invidia series. You can see it says Page Turner Award finalist. It's now long listed. I wasn't making any more new stickers for it. I'm not going to do finalist, long list, and then hopefully short list, and then maybe doubt it, but winner. You never know. And you notice there's a piece on there from Alex Shaw saying it's a gritty and compelling piece of crime fiction. It didn't cost me much to get him to say that. It's just a pint last time I saw him.
Did you design the covers yourself?
Yes. Yeah, the whole book is in the Harry book. The photograph on the front is the one I took, and then I used Photoshop to create it. The man is actually a bought image because there wasn't a man in the churchyard at the time. Out of Darkness again is bought images, but it's very hard to see where the camera is. The idea was to have the main character. Well, she's not the main character; she's just a character in it. But then the ghostly figures of the ones that have been killed behind, and then of course, no crime book is complete without a crime scene investigation going on. Harry, the back of that is just the East End of London. It's actually very close to where it takes part as that. Again, I didn't say that, but yes, I do the covers. I also do my own interiors, do my own formatting. I like to have control of the book from beginning to end, but I do have an editor. So I do work with an editor. It's I think it's important to have an editor because not only because you want to pick up those mistakes, but they pick up things in the way you're writing, or you might be repeating yourself with certain phrases, and they'll soon pick up on those. So that's I think it's essential to get it edited professionally.
And then all that's left to say, now we've done the recap of your books, is thanks for coming on.
Sorry, what was that last bit? Now we've done the recap?
All that's left to say is thanks for coming on.
Well, it's been a pleasure. I don't believe it's been an hour. We need to do this more. We need to do it more. We need to be longer.
Well, you know
or have we bored people? Have we bored people enough?
Well, we'll